No one comes back to open the door. No one. A strange sensation. But my guess is that that's how life often lacks animation. Somewhat numb, a little bit past tense. As if belonging to another season. Yesterday life. Not that I would but after all, lately, well, I might just, maybe not agree, but consider. I need to appreciate the small things. Life's small things. But whose? And who is to decide when what a small or a big thing in life is? Are things for free smaller than things that come with a price? Luxury goods are often quite small. Except maybe yachts and mansions, but they are a little bit useful, so they don't really qualify for luxury. It's interesting though to acknowledge that luxury goods almost exclusively entertain a very good positions in regard to secondary markets. I would think though that it would be to acquire something that the moment when you have it in your hand, immediately its value decreases like in a flash in comparison to perhaps a diamond necklace that you can be certain maintains its value for generations, or to obtain an exclusive flat, a luxury condo that the real estate broker have convinced you will double its value within a month or two. Fireworks. Fireworks that, investing a lot in fireworks that 30 seconds later it's just gone. But maybe on the other hand, luxury doesn't fare well with spectacular, does it? No. It needs to be a little bit practiced with a certain kind of arrogance or indifference, with a sense of je ne sais quoi. Things that are for free often seem to attract less attention. But somewhere it all flips. A gift is after all for free, but but can envelope a lot of value for the one passing the gift. It can be connected with big efforts and maybe even sacrifices. But the moment when the gift is passed, those efforts must be crossed out, forgotten. Because a gift cannot assume any form of gratitude or admiration or revenue, but equally for the person who receives the gift. It's also, it can come with oh, how could you know that this is exactly what I have for such a long time? Or, for example, oh, that's way too much, you shouldn't have. No, a gift needs to come with a certain kind of and it is first further on when the gift and the person receiving it start to develop a relation. That's when value starts to. Children is perhaps the best and the worst example. When they are for free and the production value is not exactly high. Oftentimes a rather short process, if you know what I mean. But they are also life's biggest gift. And they don't come with a return policy. It also doesn't seem that it matters how many. It's like practice doesn't wear out the uniqueness of either of them. Does small or big things have something to do with durability, perhaps? The wristwatch the son inherits from his father, who in his turn inherited it from yet another generation. The little thing obtained through choices against life's excesses, signifying commitment and loyalty. Saying something about staying put and holding the fort. Duration, durability. At the same time as the little thing holds and presents the life's lack of permanence. An inherited watch is a small big thing, or a big small thing, but never a thing, never a middle-sized thing. At some point it was quite comme il faut, but today, who keeps a job for a bunch of decades? I mean, maybe though Maybe we have forgotten something about loyalty. Or perhaps our societies have developed in ways that has made commitment incompatible. Or perhaps it's just capitalism that has grown so greedy it can't even offer us frequent flyer members, card holders, a little something at the end. She gave me a kiss. A kiss can be a tiny, tiny thing. But a certain one can change a life, maybe two or several. And then after that first one, they couldn't stop. Still, the first one pays the bills for all the following ones. But then, one day we ran out of kisses. We stopped. Maybe we got bored. Maybe we became self-conscious about the possibility of foul breath. And we started to sleep with a back to each other. But what happens to the kiss then, when we have stopped? Does it end up in a sort of malignant inflation, or is it so that a rare kiss still exchanged grow exponentially in value to become something really big? We might remember our first kiss. Perhaps we remember several first kisses. That one behind that surprising one, I really didn't see that coming. And that one, that I had longed for, that I had waited for so very, very long. A couple of them may be a little bit disappointing, probably, however, mostly because of oversized expectations due to vivid fantasies prior. And that one. That one that changed everything. First kisses. I wonder will I remember the last one? I hope. Or Rather, I wish the distance, the journey in between my last kiss and my last breath won't be long enough to get lost. I wish the time between my last kiss and my last breath isn't exceeding the limits of forgetting. We say she outlived her husband with 20 years. But then, do we also say she endured life for 20 years without the privilege, without the joy of placing a kiss on his lips? Or for that matter, of being kissed. God welcomes everybody. His house is open to all of us. Sinners, liars, and criminals included. On his door, there's a big sign saying, "Tout est gratuit." There's no entrance fee. And then we are supposed to cultivate our relationship with God. But isn't it then a little bit peculiar that as much as it is for free, we have a tendency to be upset or annoyed, possibly even pissed off when he or she or they, when they don't appreciate our prayers, when we don't feel heard or seen. Still, how could we, when it's for free, how could we expect some kind of return, some form of payback or added value? It's kind of common sense, no, that there is no interest rate on for free. And everybody knows that the Luna Park with a fat entrance fee, I mean, the Ferris wheel is going to be bigger and the haunted house will be more cinematic and high-tech. But when it comes to God, it appears that we overlook that little predicament. But then, does that make your relationship with God, your faith, a small thing? A small thing often attracts less attention. Or perhaps it would be better if it was as... We all learn that God is huge. God is immense. How could he not? He created the whole shebang. But perhaps it would be better to change roles and say it's not a small relation with a big thing, but a big thing, big relation with a small thing. And that it is our commitment, our devotion, our care for a small thing that brings us together further, that keeps the relation strong and alive. Then again, if God is in all of us, and all of us are in God, and God is everything, it would be somewhat paradoxical if he or she or they, if they would charge themselves an entrance fee. I can wait. I can wait. She asked me to hold her hand. Must have been towards the end of May. A small request. But for who? For the one being asked, it might mean almost nothing. Of course you can, sure, why not? Let's give it a try. But for the one asking, it might be associated with large efforts. With a sense of personal risk. How to overcome the shyness. And find the courage to face a possible rejection. And evidently, the response can change two lives to come. A child who slips its hand into mine. Done without conditions, innocently. And yet something so immense and overwhelmingly big. As a gesture, something small. But as a gift, something that really is big. and something that I have to take on with any whatsoever concern in regard to responsibility or morals. But I can wait. I can wait. At the end of the fence, I can wait. Nor responsibility nor morals can wait. They're really bad at waiting. It might be exactly the opposite of that. But I can wait. I can wait. At the end of the fence is waiting a small thing. And for the bus, it's usually not very long, but can be a big thing. For love, we can wait forever. But it mustn't be a big thing. It mustn't be understood as an effort, especially not a huge effort. If it's love, and that cannot be an effort, especially not a huge one. And if it's felt like an effort, then perhaps it's nothing else than a bus being really delayed. But then, when that waiting, that must not be an effort, but done with a sense of whatever and with ease, comes to an end, does that change the size from big to small? Or is it like, aha, that was that, let's move on? The person waited for coming home from the war, maybe more like a residency in Switzerland. Oh, you've been waiting for me. As if waiting was an effort or a sense of, show, an evidence of endurance, waiting becoming kind of almost competitive. And then if this is later in life and this is the third time you're waiting, does that make it a triathlon? Oh, 2.5 years, but that's hardly nothing. Maybe anticipation plays a role in this too. And then there she or he is. What happens with the waiting then? Until the return, I counted the hours, the days, even minutes. I have with closed eyes lain sleepless, wondering, longing, worrying and fantasizing about the moment where we will be reunited. But what is that time now? What are those emotions and that anticipation of your return now? There must be nothing now when you are back. And yet, until now, it was all I had. Waiting was what kept me alive. Waiting resonates of passivity. Waiting is the definition, maybe not exactly, but okay. Waiting is a little bit the definition of the opposite of suspense. Suspense is when postponed time is undulating, crisscrossed by creeks and rivers, pathways. When time is bumpy, interlaced, and cracked like dry earth after an extensive drought. Suspense is when every moment is charged. That's suspense. Waiting has nothing of those elaborations. No, it's not that it's out of focus, it's au contraire, all the dials are meticulously calibrated and all technologies are razor sharp. There are just no details, nothing that occupies. And perhaps that's why people tend to have a cigarette when they are waiting for the bus. It's a means to reinstall details. No, actually, cigarette or the waiting rather is a form of disavowal. Smoking as a way of substituting the lack of details with manufactured ones. However, knowing that that's exactly the function of the cigarette. But it's a detail, an obstacle or an asset. It's something with a lot of details bigger, or are details something that makes things small. That's a detail we certainly didn't need. But are any details necessary? Or are details, the details there to ensure that possibilities are still at hand? Details is a means to postpone permanence. There's definitely a difference in between voluntary and involuntary waiting. Think about that moment when the one that has been waiting, one of those days when you're maybe not at your very best, she says or he says, with a smooth and calm voice, "After all the time I waited for you, how could you?" What do you do about such a statement? Maybe it's not exactly the moment when you should lightheartedly ping-pong the comment back with a, "Well, I didn't exactly ask you to, did I now?" I don't know. But perhaps involuntary waiting is the same as grief. Or maybe grief is that specific form of waiting when you can't stop waiting, although you know that the waiting will never come to an end. Grief is life without. Grief is life without details, waiting without destination. Details in the sense of they are still there, but veiled. You can still sense them, but through a haze. Touch them, but only as if you were wearing thick winter gloves. Ghost details, perhaps. For every moment lived, an amount of future is subtracted. Young people have, I don't know if they exactly possess, but they have more futures. To come in terms with growing old, of aging, implies to befriend the inevitability that your futures will sooner or later come to an end. It's kind of beautiful to think about. Oops. Today, my stack of futures has been emptied. Today, I turn the last page of my book of futures, and it is time for me to bid you all farewell. I stay put here. There are no more choices left for me to make. And you go on. You go on and pursue your futures to come. But then, what happens with all those futures that weren't lived? The futures of those that died prematurely. Perhaps what we call ghosts. Are the futures of those who weren't allowed to see their stack of futures to come to an end. Of those that couldn't find the effort, I couldn't find the energy to turn those last pages. There's one thing that isn't allowed, that cannot be allowed, even if asked very kindly. One thing, and that is a permission to skip over a part of the futures that we have been assigned. However kindly I asked, however many times, however kindly I asked, must not be to impatience, I guess, precedes the moment when you come to terms with the fact, with the inevitability that your futures are not infinite. And that moment on the phone, with who? But when are you coming? Oh, it's just any time now. I'll be there in 2 days. And the person on the other end of the line responds, but I can't wait. I really can't wait. It's a weird thing to say, isn't it? Although it feels good, but still. And at the same time, you ought to. Even though everybody knows, of course you can wait, you won't die or disintegrate. And if you did die, the waiting would be in vain in the first place. And actually, it will and cannot not be a delight to wait. Because what you're waiting for is an extraordinary something or someone. A strange twist. When waiting grows and grows, outgrows itself and becomes so big, like a moment when you are anticipating the result, the outcome of a job interview, or perhaps the result of a series of medical tests. When waiting becomes so painful, so big, so charged, that even if the result is negative, it's a relief. Or when waiting for a crush to show up at a date, in a second, waiting turned into awkward silences and forced conversation. It's nothing personal, but I think I'd prefer if you were a little bit more late. Because as long as you haven't showed up, you and me We are still perfect. It's not long now. I'll be there in 2 days. But I want it to be long, because when waiting for you, I feel a gentle glow. It makes me brand new, and it's almost like I feel like freshly brushed teeth all day long. It's when I don't know when you arrive that I suffer. And sometimes I stay in that state. I stay in that state as a form of whispering masochism. Was maybe not the right wording, but the peculiar enjoyment of deliberately subjecting oneself to doubt. In the West, in quite some and dominant Christian cultures, grief is carried by the individual. We go through life together, whatever the weather and so on. But when it comes to grief and mourning, you're on your own. I'm not an expert, but I find it somewhat unfortunate, unfair, and perhaps even stingy that, as the last thing we do, the very last thing in life, we are obliged to appear in court to be judged and evaluated by God. One would think that a generous God would be like, forgive and forget. Maybe not actually forgive, but would forget in a sort of a cheeky and under the eye sort of way. I know that you know that I know, but I will still forget. Because to engage with forgiveness is still to acknowledge that something might not have been exactly as desired or up to standards. The father, the parent that offers a child, maybe more of a grown-up child, but it doesn't exactly matter. The father who offers the kid alone, even though possessing the assets and having no intention of spending them. Even worse, when in association with an offhand comment, you have to make yourself worthy. And especially then as the very last thing in life. The very last thing in life, you have to make yourself worthy. How is it? How is it that one says, you live as long as you learn from your mistakes. What an awful moral. But perhaps it is equally terrifying to think about. You learn from the things that you forgive. First, I need you to acknowledge that you did me wrong. Then I can, perhaps. Or, I will forgive you, but only after I have seen you suffer the consequences of your actions. To forgive, however noble, is still an engagement in power and domination. people proud of their own ability to forgive. That swim breaststrokes, that swim in the self-righteous appearance of forgiveness, rectification. What an utterly embarrassing, horribly proprietary attitude. Forgiveness, in order to, cannot, must not remain private. Forgiveness is the opposite. It's a matter of, it's a moment of withdrawing from oneself as private, as property holder. Forgiveness, to be anything worth, it's not something that you receive, like, can you pass me the salt, or something that you give, as in a kick in the butt. Forgiveness is something, is a moment when two or several individuals step away from the compartmentalized notion of self. To forgive, in a way, is to practice a form of commons. Forgiveness, maybe until 1776, but after that, since then, forgiveness has been on the Trans-Siberian capitalism, and you know what? Even before it arrived at its right coach, before it found its seat, is swapped. Forgive for transaction, forgive became transaction. As if, did you know the terrifying moment when forgiveness speaks, and what's in it for me? As if forgiveness was a good deal. But I need closure. Another of those, at least to me, American kind of things. Who came up with this? What an ultra boring, one-dimensional therapist can that have been? I need closure before I can forgive. Why such a reliance on reason? I need to be able to follow, to causally, step by step, before I can, an unbelievably regulatory understanding of loss and grief and trauma. Why would I want something necessarily to be left behind, to make something come to an end, having it done with, packaged and stored away in a part of the basement that is called erosion. Why would I want to put something away that has been valuable for me in life? Why would I want to, can things not cohabitate without knocking on the door? Can there be a landscape where parallel capacities can flourish together? Forgetting isn't easy because it can't be done actively. It can't be done with determination, and in fact, it is much more complex than forgiveness, especially for Americans, because there's no transaction involved. Forgiveness implies to come to an end, and then we were done with it. Whereas forgetting implies to involve oneself in a movement. in a form of dispersion, concentric movement outwards and outwards and outwards, where details and fragments, signifiers and signified, travel away until a moment when semiotic coherence is lost. Forgiveness has to be done in 2 steps. First you have to forget, still without determination, and then you have to forget to forget. So proper forgetting only occurs after the second. First you have to forget, and then first you forget, and then you forget to forget. You have to forget what you forgot. And that is the moment. Only then can you free yourself from forms of exchange of guilt. Once I told a friend, or maybe more, an acquaintance, I can't remember the context or why, but it was at a party and not very late, so it wasn't like that. Anyways, I told her this story about a guy who had a child in the same kindergarten as me. But before I had even come halfway, she turned to me and with a way too loud voice, way too loud, with a certain kind of desperation. Oh yeah, he just wanted attention. And then she continued, making sure that the guy, she might even have called him the dude, that the guy was a loser, and me as too, because I had wasted her time with this mediocre anecdote. I didn't say anything more of it. Not because I didn't want to, but because she had already started to talk with somebody else about something else that apparently was way more exciting, although it came across as the opposite to me. So the guy in any case, who had a child in the same kindergarten as me, identifiable as a cultural entrepreneur, certainly not an artist, neither a manager, more like we are familiar with the type. Anyways, so the guy who had a child in the same kindergarten as me, at times when picking up the kids, or one kid, when picking up the kid, he showed up with one of those fluorescent sort of jackets, you know, the kind of jackets that garbage handlers and city cleaners wear. Too orange, or if it's, or whatever color it might, some other identifiable color, if color is even something that we can use for such an item. And I mean, of course, how could attention, but obviously, what else could, here I am, hello, c'est moi. But through fragments of exchange that never ended up being a proper conversation, he sort of informed me, or maybe he rather, he allowed me to understand that actually, the moment when he put on the jacket, he became invisible. From that moment on, when the jacket was on, everything was about the jacket. And he, even if the jacket was the right side, he disappeared inside it. For him, the jacket offered a form of anonymity. Naturally, without the possible dark sides of anonymity, of becoming completely excluded or facing regulation. He could, after all, still pick up his child at the kindergarten. But interesting, but as a person without content, as a human without features, as whichever human, as just human, to be. Of course, we can understand this as a form of privilege, and I think that he acknowledged this or was aware. But for him, there was something else going on. There was something altogether. To be anonymous, is that a small or a big thing? Normally, conventionally, I would think that it's understood as a form of subtraction, that something has been taken away, redacted, erased. Talking to Freud, one would say that anonymity is a form of lack. And when we are anyways at it, perhaps it is all Marx's fault, this understanding. After all, at home, off hours, spending time in nature, you're a person and you have agency in regard to your personality. Whereas at work, you are withdrawn from this, you are alienated and one of countless anonymous workers. I was thinking about nature in that regard. I thought what made spending time in nature amazing is that nature doesn't care. Nature acknowledges that a sentient being is pressuring it, that something with blood circulating inside it is leaning against a tree, or that a consciousness steps on a branch that cracks it, or lifts its gaze to contemplate the dance of some leaves. But nature doesn't care about me. It cares about the human, but not about me. Never mind. There's of course not a subject consciousness that is nature, but millions and thousands of different entities that equally don't acknowledge each other as anything else than entities, capacities. So in other words, to spend time in nature is to be relieved from oneself for a moment and become anonymous. On the other hand, maybe it's also possible to regard anonymity to be the stage just before possibility. I mean, in the sense of just before being identifiable as either possibly this or possibly that. So anonymity then is a moment of living all possibilities and impossibilities at the same time, at every time, all the time. Anonymity is like the calm before the storm, the moment just before something starts to pick up speed. It's not explosion or implosion, it is without prefix, it's plosion, just plosion. When something becomes possible, possibly this or possibly that, necessity is crossed out. Possibility is not necessary, it's possibly this or possibly something else. Anonymity, however weird it might sound, is to be necessary. But not necessarily this or necessarily this or that. Just necessary. Whichever necessary. Just necessary. I can wait. I really can. Wait. At the end of the fence. Possibility. Possibly this or possibly that. Because possibility doesn't end. It goes on and on, perpetuates. Possibility is the opposite of being real. Possibility is the absence of being genuine. To become anonymous equals to become real. And maybe that's why we, or at least I, am kind of scared of city cleaners and garbage hunters with those jackets. Because anonymity doesn't communicate possibilities, nor does it ask for a choice, doesn't offer propositions. And because of this, I am faced with the possibility of my own anonymity, of my own erasure. But anonymity is not a matter of becoming erased, it's the very, very opposite. Anonymity implies becoming full, becoming completely full and fully completed, and without having any choices, especially not any choices to be done in regard to anybody or any something else. But I wonder, is possibility smaller or bigger than anonymity? Some say, one doesn't choose love, but love chooses us. Maybe since I didn't make the choice, didn't decide for this or that, to love isn't a matter of possibility. But instead, since it wasn't chosen by me, love is necessary. To love is simultaneously the fear and the bliss of becoming anonymous. Fear because it implies the withdrawal of possibility, of a choice. And the bliss, exactly because there is no choices to be made anymore. To love means to be in place, to be one with oneself. Love has no reasons, only necessity. So when I say, I love you, I am offered a little window, maybe just a tiny one. Still, I am offered an interval vis-a-vis possibility. It's pretty remarkable, isn't it? That to love, possibly the most personal thing we humans do, is at the same time something that doesn't and cannot belong to us. To love implies to give oneself up, to a little bit renounce one's personhood. The I that love you both is and isn't me at the same